They didn't even bother to hide it. The way they sized him up with one look at his dark skin and simple clothes. The way they let the sneers slip before the introductions were over. He was there to help. They decided he was there to serve. Every question dripped with contempt. Every laugh was a promise that this room wasn't his. But they didn't know what he was really there to see. They didn't realize this wasn't their strategy meeting. It was their final exam. Because buried under every insult was the test they didn't know they were taking. And the grade would cost them everything. If you're ready for a story that turns cruelty into its own punishment, hit like, subscribe for more, and tell me in the comments what you think about this kind of twist, and where you're watching from today. Let's get into it. Arlo Jennings pressed through the heavy glass doors of Callister Equity Group, the gray dawn soaking his cheap khakis at the hem. He wiped wet fingers on his wrinkled light blue button-down, trying to smooth the lines before anyone noticed. The lobby was cold marble and hush, and his footsteps felt too loud on the floor. Behind the polished security desk, a big man with a shiny badge glanced at him once, lips curling. "Maintenance entrance is around back," the guard grunted, not even hiding the smirk. Arlo paused, heart drumming in his chest, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'm here for the executive strategy review." He said it carefully, polite. The guard's eyebrows lifted mockingly. "Really?" he asked, in a tone that said everything. The second guard on the other side of the desk laughed. The first one scrolled lazily through the sign-in list and found Arlo's name with a sigh. "Well, look at that. Big day, huh? Don't get the floors dirty." He hit the buzzer with unnecessary force, the gate clicking open like it resented him. Arlo felt heat rising in his face, but didn't say anything. He walked through, clutching his battered leather portfolio with both hands like it was armor. The guard's quiet chuckles trailed him like shadows. In the elevator, he stared at his reflection in the polished steel, the wrinkled shirt, the cheap scuffed loafers. He tried to smooth his collar with damp fingers, whispering his introduction under his breath like a prayer. He rode up in silence. The conference floor was modern, gray carpet, silent walls hung with abstract art. He walked to the door that said Executive Strategy Review in clean brass letters. He stopped. He could see himself in the metal. Black hair damp from the rain, sweat beading at his hairline. He took one breath, two. "You're here to work. Don't react." He turned the knob and stepped in. Silence fell like a guillotine. 12 people at a long gleaming table in tailored suits and ironed blouses turned as one to look at him. Darla Quinn, HR manager in a blood-red dress with perfect makeup and perfectly sharp eyes, sat at the far end. She looked him up and down slowly, with exaggerated appraisal. Then she smiled, baring white teeth like a threat. "Oh, everyone," she drawled, voice rising theatrically. "Our diversity experiment is here." The table roared with laughter. Arlo blinked hard, heart thudding. He swallowed and tried to force a polite smile. "Good morning. I'm Arlo Jennings, here for the strategy review." Chuck Rollins, the CFO with hair like a silver helmet, didn't even bother hiding his sneer. "Lose your suit at the laundromat?" he asked, eyes raking over Arlo's rumpled clothes. Brenton Miles, a younger manager in designer glasses, put on a mock-genteel voice. "Hi, I'm Arlo, and I'm here to save the company because you're all so stupid." He pitched his voice high and nasal, crossing his eyes. The room broke into laughter again. Arlo forced himself forward, muscles locked, and picked a chair at the end of the table. Brenton rose halfway in a mocking bow, one arm sweeping the air. "Right this way, sir. Don't worry, we sprayed for bugs." More laughter. Arlo set his folder on the table carefully, but his hands were shaking. The clasp popped open and papers nearly fell. He scrambled to hold them down. Chuck made an exaggerated sniff. "What's that smell?" "Wet dog." "Oh, never mind." He poured coffee from the silver carafe with painfully slow, deliberate movements. Darla leaned back, crossing her legs and arms, watching him with that cold, amused smile. "At least he's punctual," she said. Chuck snorted. "That's good. Punctuality is the key to success, isn't it?" Brenton turned to the others. "Well, that's one of them. Punctual, subservient, grateful." Arlo's mouth went dry. He stared down at the table surface, seeing only the blurred shapes of the wood grain. His eyes stung. He tried to clear his throat, but no words came. Darla drummed her nails. "So, Arlo, you have this amazing plan to save $6 billion, she asked, sugary sweet but poisonous underneath. Chuck tapped his spoon, clink, 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 eyes on Arlo without blinking. "Go on, enlighten us." Brenton cupped his hand to his ear dramatically. "We're listening, genius." He turned to the others, stage whispering. "Do you think he can spell billion?" Chuck Rollins yawned dramatically and glanced at his watch. Brenton Miles cracked his knuckles one by one, smirking as he watched Arlo from across the table. Trying to hide the shaking in his legs, Arlo forced himself to speak. His voice cracked despite his best effort to keep it even. I have the preliminary numbers for our cost reduction plan," he began, fingers clutching the edge of his portfolio so hard his knuckles turned white. He cleared his throat, willing his voice not to shake again. But Brenton cut him off before he could continue, raising one hand in an overly dramatic, patronizing gesture. Wait, he said, looking around the room with mock alarm. "Guys, I think we're going too fast for him. Let's give him a second to catch up, yeah." He turned to Arlo with an exaggeratedly concerned expression. "You okay there, champ? Need some flashcards?" Laughter rippled through the room, harsh and cutting. Darla gave a short bark of laughter, slapping the table lightly with her palm as if congratulating Brenton on his wit. Chuck didn't laugh outright, but smirked into his coffee cup, eyes glittering with malicious amusement over the rim. Arlo felt heat flooding his face. He dropped his eyes back to the pages in front of him, staring so hard at the numbers they seemed to swim on the paper. He wanted to sink into the floor. He wanted to disappear. He drew in a slow breath through his nose and tried again. "I'd like to go over the operational expenses for the past quarter. I think there's," but the sound of chairs scraping and people shuffling around cut him off again. Chuck Rollins pushed back from the table, letting out an exaggerated sigh of boredom. "You know what? I need some coffee if I'm going to make it through this," he announced to no one in particular. He walked over to the sideboard along the wall, the silver coffee service gleaming under the recessed lighting. As he reached for the carafe, he glanced over his shoulder at Arlo and smirked. "Hey, new guy," he called, voice dripping with mock friendliness. "You want a cup? Black, I assume?" He held up the empty carafe and shook it once so that the last thick drips spattered onto the tray. "Oops," he added innocently. "Looks like we're all out. Sorry about that. Didn't know you people liked it black." The entire table broke into laughter again. Even Darla, who was usually the one pretending to keep order, pressed a hand to her mouth to stifle her giggles. Brenton laughed, so hard he actually wiped tears from the corners of his eyes. Arlo sat frozen. He felt his face grow hot and then cold, his palms slick with sweat. He couldn't bring himself to speak. He couldn't even look at them. He was afraid if he tried to answer, his voice would tremble, or worse, he would cry. He clenched his teeth so hard his jaw ached. But Brenton wasn't done. He slammed his palm on the table to get everyone's attention, still wiping away laughter. Wait, he wheezed. "You know what's the best part? He's so polite about it. Listen to him try to talk all proper." He straightened in his seat, smoothed his hair back with both hands, and in a high, nasal voice mimicked Arlo's earlier halting introduction. "Good morning. I'm Arlo Jennings. I'm here for the Strat-EG review." He put exaggerated emphasis on every syllable, crossing his eyes and sticking out his tongue slightly to send the room into fresh peals of laughter. Darla shook her head, trying to regain control, but snorting with mirth. Even Chuck, usually the reserved cynic, actually let out a guffaw that echoed off the walls. Brenton bowed deeply from his chair, one hand pressed to his chest, the other extended outward like a mock Shakespearean actor. "Oh, please," he said with false gravity. "Do continue, good sir. Enlighten us with your," he wiggled his fingers in the air, "economical wisdom." He turned to the others. He sounds like he's reading off a teleprompter for the first time in his life. Chuck shook his head, stirring what remained of the coffee with an audible clink. "He's trying so hard to sound educated," he mused, loud enough for everyone to hear. "It's adorable." He lifted his mug in a mock toast. "Let's get this tight. Everyone else, help yourselves to lunch or stay here to prep. I want no surprises this afternoon." Her eyes swept over the table like a queen surveying her court. When they landed on Arlo, they paused just long enough to let him know she saw him, and chose to move on. She didn't assign him anywhere, didn't say a word to him. He waited. The others were already standing, gathering laptops and notebooks, moving toward the door. Chuck made a show of stretching his arms and yawning. "Man," he muttered loudly, "nothing like a working lunch with the A-team." Brenton snorted. "Yeah," he agreed. "No dead weight, right?" They high-fived, not even trying to be subtle. Arlo's fingers tightened on the edge of the table, so hard he felt the wood bite into his skin. He swallowed hard. His voice was so small he barely recognized it when he tried. Should I join the prep session?" He managed to choke the words out. Darla paused at the door. She turned slightly, tilting her head as if she didn't quite hear him. Her mouth curled into a patronizing smile. "Oh," she said with false sweetness, "this is going to be a tight working group. You know, senior folks only. Maybe just familiarize yourself with the handouts. Get comfortable with the numbers." She didn't wait for him to answer. She turned and walked out, Brenton and Chuck at her heels. The door clicked shut behind them with a finality that left Arlo staring at the polished wood, the sound of his own breathing loud in his ears. He sat there for a full minute, the empty chairs around him feeling like accusations. Then he stood up slowly, clutching his folder, his legs trembling with shame and rage and something worse, despair. He took a moment to calm himself. He wasn't going to cry. Not here. He walked down the hall, the carpet swallowing the sound of his footsteps. He followed the signs to Conference B. Maybe it had been a mistake. Maybe if he just knocked, if he just asked, they would let him in. He stopped outside the door. Through the frosted glass, he could see shapes moving, heads bent over papers, the blur of Chuck gesturing wildly as he laughed. Arlo swallowed and raised his hand to knock. But as he knocked lightly, trying to be respectful, he heard the sudden hush inside. Then the scrape of a chair. Then muffled laughter. He frowned and knocked again, a little louder this time. "Excuse me," he said, voice cracking despite himself. "It's Arlo. I'd like to join the session, if that's all right." He heard nothing but muffled voices, the scrape of chairs again, a sudden hush like kids trying not to giggle in church. He waited. He raised his hand again to knock when he heard the unmistakable sound of a lock sliding into place. Click. The door was locked from the inside. He froze. His breath hitched in his throat. For a second, he couldn't even process it. He blinked hard, heat flooding his face, his heart thudding painfully. He knocked again, harder this time. "Please," he said. His voice shook. "Please, I need to be part of this. I have my notes. I did the projections." Silence. He pressed his ear to the door. He heard the unmistakable snickers. He heard Brenton's voice, muffled but clear enough. "Shoo, don't let him in." Then Darla's sharper tone, trying and failing to hide her amusement. "Just ignore him. He'll get the hint." More laughter. Louder now. Arlo pulled back. His eyes stung so badly he had to blink fast to keep the tears from spilling. He knocked one more time, softer now, a pitiful sound he hated himself for making. Nothing. Silence, except for a giggle that slipped out before it was shushed again. He felt dizzy. He turned away from the door, wiping at his face roughly with the back of his hand. He started to walk away down the hall, moving like a sleepwalker. Then he heard the sound. A rustle. Paper sliding under the door. He turned back, confused. On the floor, half in the hall, half inside, was a single sheet of white paper. He bent slowly, knees creaking, and picked it up with shaking fingers. In thick black marker, someone had written, "Try cleaning the toilets instead." He stared at the words. The letters were all caps, written with the glee of a bully carving insults into a desk. He felt something break inside his chest. He clutched the paper, crumpling it in his fist, pressing it so hard the marker smeared onto his palm. He heard one last muffled laugh from inside the room. His brain felt too hot to focus, every column and decimal mark mocking his efforts to pretend like he belonged. He read the same line 5 times without registering a single word. After what felt like forever, he heard footsteps in the hall. The door swung wide and the breakout group filed in, laughing and chatting like they hadn't just locked him out. Darla led the pack, a sleek tablet tucked under her arm, lips curved in that permanent smirk. Brenton trailed her, phone in hand, tapping away with casual arrogance. Chuck brought up the rear, checking his watch with the air of someone whose time was too precious to waste. Arlo sat up a little straighter, throat dry. He waited for someone to acknowledge him, to tell him what they decided in the breakout. No one did. They spread out in their seats, ignoring him as they unpacked fresh printed handouts he hadn't seen before. He glanced down at his folder and felt the shame wash over him all over again. It was official now. He was out of a loop. Darla settled herself at the head of the table, crossed her legs elegantly, and began tapping at her tablet with manicured fingers. Without looking up, she said, "Let's break for lunch. 30 minutes." She glanced around the table meaningfully. "I'd suggest we reconvene promptly. Some of us need to get on the same page." Her gaze flicked at Arlo with deliberate insult before she returned to her screen. The others snickered quietly. Chairs scraped back. Arlo hesitated before standing, trying to figure out if he should stay. But the smell of catered food wafted in from the corridor, and the rumble in his stomach betrayed him. He realized he hadn't eaten since a dry bagel in his tiny kitchen that morning, and even that had been stale. He followed them out into the hall, moving slowly, trying not to look desperate. The catering tables were lined up neatly in the side lounge, trays of salad, sandwiches, fruit, silver thermoses of coffee and tea. As he picked up a plate, he heard low murmurs, the scrape of cutlery, the hushed laughter. He tried to tune it out, focusing on scooping a spoonful of pasta salad onto his plate. But as he turned, he caught Darla's voice, crystal clear despite her fake low tone. "He's actually, well, she was saying to Chuck, her voice thick with amusement, surprisingly articulate. For one of them. Chuck let out a grunt of laughter that sounded like a bark. Brenton didn't even bother lowering his voice. "God, Darla," he said, chuckling. "Don't say it so loud. He might think you respect him." The 3 of them laughed, the sound rolling through the lounge like thunder. Arlo froze mid-step, the plastic fork trembling in his hand. He felt all the eyes flick to him for one hot second and then dart away, pretending they hadn't heard. He stood there paralyzed, the blood rushing in his ears, so loud it drowned everything else. He forced himself to move, to walk stiffly to a small round table in the corner farthest from them. He sat down carefully, setting his plate in front of him. He didn't even want to eat anymore. He poked at the food with his fork, stomach churning with nausea. He heard more laughter behind him. Chuck's deep voice rumbled. "At least he's got manners. I'll give him that." Darla's laugh chimed in. So polite. Maybe he'll say thank you when we fire him." Brenton added, "We should put that on the agenda. Teach the intern gratitude." Arlo sat frozen, staring at the table. His hands shook. He felt the tears pricking again at the corners of his eyes and blinked rapidly, willing them away. He wouldn't cry here. Not in front of them. He took a deep breath. Another. The fork fell from his fingers and clattered on the table. He didn't pick it up. He just sat there, motionless, breathing in short, ragged gasps. The lunch break felt endless. Finally, Darla called out, voice bright and cruelly chipper. "All right, everyone. Back to work." Chairs scraped. People filed out with murmured small talk, leaving crumpled napkins and half-eaten sandwiches in their wake. Arlo waited until the room was empty before standing. He threw his untouched plate in the trash and wiped his sweaty palms on his khakis. He walked slowly back to the conference room, feeling every step like it weighed 100 pounds. When he entered, he saw them all settling back in, spreading out their handouts, prepping their notes. He sat carefully in his chair, folding his hands on the table. Brenton caught his eye across the table and smiled, wide and white, no warmth in it at all. This was the part of the meeting where they were supposed to refine the numbers for the afternoon presentation, the chance for anyone to suggest final changes. He'd come prepared with detailed analysis, cost models, and an alternate plan that could save millions over the next year if they would only listen. He waited for his moment, swallowing hard, heart pounding like a trapped bird in his chest. Darla cleared her throat to bring the meeting to order. She smoothed her red dress and tapped her tablet, eyes scanning the room. "Okay," she said crisply. "Let's finalize the numbers for corporate. I want everyone's input. This has to be bulletproof." She didn't look at Arlo. She didn't even glance in his direction. Chuck leaned back in his chair, arms crossed over his chest, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. Brenton stretched, his chair creaking, and pulled his laptop closer with a languid, mocking grace. Arlo drew in a slow breath and forced his hand up. It felt heavy as lead. He cleared his throat, voice cracking embarrassingly. I have a cost-saving model here," he began, trying to keep the tremor out of his words. "It's an alternate plan that I think could reduce supplier costs by 12% next year. I put it in the shared drive this morning for everyone." Brenton made a show of tapping on his keyboard with exaggerated confusion. "Shared drive, huh?" he said, drawling it out. He turned to Chuck, voice dripping sarcasm. "You see anything from our little intern here?" Chuck shrugged, clicked twice, and then raised an eyebrow with mock surprise. "Huh," he said slowly. "Well, look at that. Nothing there." He turned the screen so the room could see the empty folder. He clucked his tongue. "Guess it's just another one of those glitches in the system." The sarcasm was thick enough to drown in. Laughter bubbled up around the table. Darla didn't even pretend to intervene. She just smiled thinly and watched Arlo's face carefully, as if studying an insect under glass. Arlo's mouth opened and closed. He felt the blood drain from his face. His palms went cold. He blinked, trying to focus. It was there this morning," he insisted, his voice tiny and lost in the cavernous room. "I double-checked it. I saved it twice." Chuck raised an eyebrow and spread his hands in mock innocence. "Well, it's not there now," he said lightly. "Guess you'll have to remember it all off the top of your head." Brenton snorted. "Maybe he wrote it on the back of a napkin," he suggested. The room laughed again, sharp and mean. Arlo's throat closed up. He felt tears threaten but forced them back, blinking rapidly until his eyes burned. He opened his folder with trembling fingers and found the hard copy printout he'd made just in case. He held it up like an offering. I have it here," he said desperately. "I can go through it line by line." The laughter died down, but the smirks remained. Brenton drummed his fingers on the table, eyes locked on Arlo with predatory glee. "Oh, good," he said. "Bring it over. Let's see it." Arlo hesitated, then stood slowly, legs unsteady. He walked around the table and handed the neatly printed packet to Brenton. His fingers brushed against Brenton's as he passed it, and he jerked back as if burned. Brenton didn't even glance at the pages. He flipped the packet lazily in one hand, ruffling the sheets so they bent and creased. He mused loudly. Interesting approach. Really innovative. Then, with theatrical slowness, he crumpled the entire packet into a tight ball. Arlo froze. His breath caught in his throat. He watched as Brenton squeezed the papers into an ugly, wrinkled mass, his knuckles whitening. Then Brenton smiled. It was wide and toothy and empty of anything human. He tossed the crumpled ball over his shoulder. It bounced once on the floor and rolled under the table. "Fetch," Brenton said simply. Silence fell. Even Chuck raised an eyebrow, but it was with cold amusement, not disapproval. Darla didn't say a word. She sat with her legs crossed, eyes glittering with interest, watching Arlo like she was waiting to see what he would do next. Arlo felt heat surge through his face and neck. His ears roared with the sound of blood rushing. He stood frozen, unable to move, unable to speak. Brenton spread his hands. "Well," he prompted, voice sickly sweet. "You want us to read your notes? Go get them. I'm not your secretary." The room fell quiet except for the humming of the fluorescent lights overhead and the click of pens being idly flicked against notebooks. "All right," she said with exaggerated patience, "since it seems our friend Arlo has so many creative ideas about saving the company money, why don't we give him a little test?" She didn't even bother looking at him. She set it to the table, to the laughter waiting to bubble beneath their polite, plastic smiles. Brenton leaned forward eagerly. "Oh, I love a test," he said in a sing-song voice. "This'll be fun." Chuck set his coffee down with a little clink and steepled his fingers in front of his mouth like he was contemplating something serious. He nodded once, solemnly, theatrically. "Good idea," he agreed, eyes flicking to Arlo with slow, deliberate contempt. "Let's see what the junior analyst got." Arlo blinked, his heart suddenly thudding like it wanted out of his chest. His mouth was dry as dust. He wanted to speak, to protest, to ask what they were doing, but the words didn't form. He sat frozen as Darla slowly turned to him at last, her smile cold and sharp enough to cut glass. "Arlo," she said sweetly, "here's the deal. We've got a scenario here. We want you to solve it. Show us those big cost-saving chops you're so proud of." She slid a printed sheet down the table toward him. It skidded and stopped just short of his hand. He picked it up carefully, fingers trembling. He tried to focus on the lines of text, but the numbers were a mess of contradictions, impossible variables stacked on top of one another, margins that shifted halfway through the scenario. It was deliberate, designed to be unsolvable. He swallowed hard, hearing his pulse roaring in his ears. This isn't correct," he managed, voice cracking despite every ounce of effort. "These numbers don't balance. You can't solve this as written." Brenton snorted. "Oh, he's just too smart for us," he said, eyes twinkling with malicious delight. "Listen to him. Can't even show his work." Chuck let out a low laugh, shaking his head like a disappointed parent. "What's wrong?" he asked. "Didn't they teach you basic math where you went to school?" Darla didn't bother to hide her smirk. "Come on, Arlo," she coaxed in a tone thick with mockery. "You're always talking about savings. Don't tell me you can't solve a simple budget problem." He stared at the sheet in front of him, the letters blurring as hot tears threatened again. He blinked them away fiercely, refusing to give them the satisfaction. He forced himself to try. He picked up his pen and started scribbling numbers in the margins, feeling the sweat gather under his arms, on the back of his neck, making his shirt cling uncomfortably. The silence of the room was oppressive, filled with the crackle of tension and the occasional snicker. He felt every eye on him like needles. After 5 agonizing minutes, he put the pen down. His voice came out as a hoarse whisper. "It's not solvable," he said. "You wrote it wrong on purpose. This isn't even real." For a heartbeat, the room was silent. Then Brenton's laughter broke the stillness, loud and sharp, echoing off the glass walls. He slapped the table and leaned back in his chair, head thrown back, howling. Chuck let out a bark of laughter, joined by 2 of the junior managers who had been quiet until then, but couldn't resist the pack mentality. Even Darla laughed, though she tried to cover it with a cough and failed miserably. Brenton wiped imaginary tears from his eyes. "Oh my God," he gasped, still laughing. He actually tried. Look at him. He tried to solve it like it was real. Chuck clapped slowly, the sound deliberate and insulting. He turned to the others. "Give him a hand, people," he drawled. He tried so hard. One by one, they joined in. The slow, mocking applause filled the room like poison gas. The interns exchanged glances, but didn't dare not clap. Darla leaned back, crossing her legs, her face split in a cruel grin. "Bravo, Arlo," she said. "Truly impressive. Maybe you should go back to the mailroom. I hear they need people who can count to 10. Brenton picked up the chant with glee. "Back to the mailroom," he sang. "Back to the mailroom." Chuck joined in, the words morphing from words to a taunt. Back to the mailroom. Soon the entire room was chanting, the rhythm slow and mocking, hands slapping the table in time. Arlo felt the world narrow to a tunnel, the edges blackening. He couldn't breathe. He wanted to scream. He wanted to lunge across the table and knock the smirk off Brenton's face, to wipe that cruel grin from Darla's mouth. But he didn't. He couldn't. He sat perfectly still, eyes fixed on the impossible problem in front of him, the fake numbers running and twisting in his vision. His chest heaved with ragged breaths. He bit the inside of his cheek, so hard he tasted blood. Brenton lounged with his chair tilted back dangerously, arms folded behind his head, eyes half-lidded, but shining with the glee of a bully who knew he'd won. Chuck sat with his laptop open, not typing anything, just watching Arlo from over the screen, his mouth twisted in a thoughtful, contemptuous smirk. Arlo blinked slowly, the taste of blood in his mouth from biting the inside of his cheek so hard. He felt a single tear slip free, despite himself, tracing the line of his nose before dropping onto the fake budget problem that was still lying in front of him. He didn't even bother to wipe it away. He let it sink into the paper and blur the ink. They were ignoring him now, which was somehow even worse than when they were mocking him. At least, when they'd been taunting him, he'd been visible. Now, he was nothing. Less than nothing. He sat there for another minute, two, the silence filled with the soft tap of fingers on keyboards and the occasional dry cough. Then slowly, deliberately, he moved. He straightened his spine one vertebra at a time, feeling every protest from his stiff, cramped muscles. He inhaled once, slowly, through his nose. He let it out in a quiet, measured breath. He reached down and closed the folder in front of him, pressing it shut with careful precision. The soft click of the clasp was the loudest sound in the room for him. He set his pen down parallel to the folder's edge, aligning them perfectly. Then he pushed back from the table, with a low scrape of his chair legs on the carpet. The noise made Darla pause mid-sentence. She blinked at him, irritated that he'd interrupted her flow. Brenton let his chair drop forward with a thud, eyes narrowing in sudden, wary interest. Chuck's smirk twitched, faltered just slightly. Arlo stood slowly, his knees stiff, his shoulders hunched at first before he rolled them back, straightening to his full height. He wasn't tall, but he made himself as tall as he could be. His face was pale, the tracks of his tears still clear, but his eyes were dry now, flat, cold. He reached down beside his chair and picked up his battered, old leather briefcase. He set it on the table in front of him with a dull, final thump. He undid the worn brass clasps one at a time, the quiet clicks slicing through the silence like scalpel cuts. He didn't speak immediately. He just worked slowly, deliberately, making them wait, making them watch. Finally, he looked up. His voice was quiet, hoarse from disuse, but there was steel under it, unbending and unbroken. "I didn't come here," he said evenly, eyes sweeping the room one face at a time, "to suggest changes." Darla frowned, opening her mouth to interrupt, but something in his expression made her hesitate. Brenton's smirk faltered as confusion crept in. Chuck's fingers stilled on the keyboard. Arlo didn't blink. He didn't flinch. He continued, voice gaining strength with every word. "I didn't come here to pitch ideas," he said. "I didn't come here to ask you for anything, or to beg you for respect, or to prove anything to you." His hand rested on the open briefcase. His fingers drummed once, softly. "I came here," he said with perfect, unshakable calm, "to evaluate you." The silence was total. You could have heard a pin drop. Darla's eyes narrowed, trying to understand. Brenton's mouth opened in an ugly, instinctive sneer, but no sound came out. Chuck leaned forward just a hair, squinting, suspicion dawning behind the scorn. Arlo waited a single heartbeat. Then he reached into the battered case and pulled out a folder. Not the cheap office issue type. A thick, cream-colored folder embossed with the company's logo in deep navy and gold. He held it carefully in both hands and set it on the table in front of him. He opened it with reverence, turning it so they could see. The top page was covered in neat legal text, the company letterhead and the signatures at the bottom unmistakable. It was a formal corporate board directive. At the very top in bold it read, "Interim CEO Authorization." Brenton made a strangled sound, half laugh, half gasp. "What the hell is this?" he managed, voice cracking. Arlo didn't even look at him. He kept his eyes on Darla, watching the color drain from her face. Her lips parted. She read the text once, twice. Then a third time, panic blooming in her eyes like fire. Chuck's face had gone flat and gray. He swallowed visibly, jaw working. He reached for the page like he needed to see it up close, but Arlo's hand dropped onto the folder, pinning it to the table. His knuckles were white. Then he spoke, voice low and controlled, every word perfectly enunciated. "I want you to understand exactly what this meeting was." He paused, let them squirm, let them listen. Darla swallowed audibly, her eyes darting to Brenton, who refused to meet them. Chuck hunched forward, staring fixedly at the folder like it might save him. Arlo continued, relentless. You all thought this was an ordinary strategy review, a formality, something you could sleepwalk through between your country club luncheons and your little power games. But this wasn't a review of cost savings. It was a review of you. He let that hang for a heartbeat. Then he moved his gaze to Brenton first. Your conduct. He swung to Chuck. Your competence. Then to Darla, who seemed to shrink back in her chair. Your culture. He straightened even further, drawing himself up. He could feel his pulse thudding calmly now, no longer the frenetic stutter of fear, but a steady war drum of certainty. Because for the past 3 weeks, the board has been deciding whether to renew $6 billion in funding to this division. That figure landed like a bomb in the silent room. Darla's fingers spasmed around her tablet so hard the case creaked. Brenton let out a strangled half-laugh, but it died immediately in his throat. Chuck made a low, guttural sound like an animal realizing it was trapped. Arlo didn't blink. He didn't flinch. He delivered the truth with the same cold precision they had used to dissect him all day. $6 billion, he repeated softly, the words sharp as knives. That's what was at stake. That's what you were supposed to demonstrate you could manage. And today? Today was your chance to show me why you deserved it. He let the silence swallow them again, the gravity of it pressing down on their hunched shoulders, flattening the false bravado out of them like steamrollers. He heard Darla inhale sharply, trying to find words, but he cut her off before she could speak. And what did you show me? He asked, voice cracking just once with the emotion he'd held in all day before smoothing out like tempered steel. You showed me exactly who you are. You locked me out of meetings. You deleted my work. You mocked me in front of staff. You called me a diversity hire to my face. You designed impossible tests to humiliate me. His voice was rising now, still controlled, but with a serrated edge. He didn't yell. He didn't need to. His words were a hammer driving the nails into their coffins. You didn't even bother hiding it. Because you thought I was powerless. Because you thought you were safe. He let that truth sink in. Brenton had turned gray. His usual smirk withered into a grimace. Chuck swallowed hard, eyes darting to the door as if considering escape. Darla's lips trembled, her eyes glassy with horror. Arlo pressed his palms flat on the table, leaning in slightly. He dropped his voice to a near whisper, forcing them to strain to hear him. You failed. All of you. No one dared speak. He straightened slowly, drawing in a deep, steady breath, the calm radiating off him like a hurricane's eye. He lifted the authorization folder again, tapping it once on the table for emphasis. Based on your performance here today, he said clearly, each word carved in stone, and on your values you demonstrated proudly and without shame, I'm making my recommendation to the board. He paused, savoring their terror. Then he delivered the killing blow. I am terminating that funding, effective immediately. The word struck them like a slap. Darla actually flinched, her tablet falling from her limp fingers and hitting the floor with a muted thunk. Brenton choked on a half-formed protest, mouth working soundlessly, no jokes left to hide behind. Chuck finally let out a low curse, his face crumpling, one hand going to his forehead like he could physically block the reality of what was happening. Arlo didn't move. He didn't soften. He let them sit in it, let them stew in the consequences of their own cruelty. He watched them realize what $6 billion vanishing would mean. Projects halted, jobs lost, their careers turned to ash in a single stroke. The room was so quiet you could hear the soft hum of the building's HVAC, the tick of the clock on the wall marking every second of their downfall. Darla tried once more to speak, voice cracking. You can't do this, she whispered, a desperate plea hidden under the false authority. The elevator doors opened with a gentle chime, and he stepped in alone, watching the numbers descend one by one, each floor falling away beneath him like dead weight. When he reached the lobby, he adjusted his collar and walked out through security. The same guard who had sneered at him that morning gaped openly, his mouth falling open in confusion. He didn't even try to stop Arlo. He didn't say a word. Arlo didn't bother acknowledging him. He walked straight outside into the gray afternoon light, the clouds low and heavy, the wind cutting cold across his face. He felt every sensation with heightened clarity. The slap of his shoes on the wet pavement, the chill biting his ears, the smell of car exhaust and damp concrete. He drew in a deep breath, held it, and let it go, leaving behind the stink of that boardroom. Behind him, the company he had just kneecapped sat in its glass tower, oblivious workers at their desks, for now at least, typing away at numbers that no longer mattered. Because the call had already gone in. He had sent the message before leaving the floor, the board notified with a simple line in an email that had taken no time at all to compose, but had the weight of an avalanche. Funding terminated. Effective immediately. In less than an hour, the finance office upstairs would discover the gap. The CFO's phone would ring with desperate calls from division heads. By then, news would have leaked. It always did. Financial journalists had their sources, their feelers out in the corporate world, like sharks sniffing blood in the water. And there was a lot of blood. By lunchtime, industry news sites were picking up the story. By early afternoon, it had spread to the major financial channels, running in the little tickers at the bottom of screens in bars and gyms and airports. Callister Equity faces major funding withdrawal. Division loses $6 billion backing. Analysts predict massive restructuring. The stock ticker told the rest of the story. The red line on the graph dropped like a rock thrown off a cliff, 15%, 20%, 28%. Finally settling at 35% down by closing bell. Traders cursed and dumped shares in a panic. Institutional investors called in to scream at their brokers. Analysts issued downgrades so fast they could barely keep up. The company's PR team scrambled to issue a statement, one so generic and false it fooled no one. We are undergoing a planned strategic review to better align our funding with our core mission. No one bought it. Not after the board made their own terse announcement confirming the withdrawal, citing serious internal culture concerns and leadership review underway. Employees who hadn't even been in the room that morning began to panic. Emails flew. People started quietly updating their resumes. The whispers turned to full-volume rumors in the break rooms and Slack channels. Word spread about what had happened in the conference room. People always talked, after all. Arlo's name came up over and over, hushed at first, then louder. They called him the hatchet man, the cleaner, the ghost with the executioner's briefcase. Some said it with respect, others with fear, a few with admiration. Because not everyone in that building had liked Darla, Brenton, or Chuck. Their style of management had burned plenty of people over the years, and there were old grudges that had never been allowed to see daylight until now. But the consequences were most visible in that same room where the damage had been done. Chuck Rollins didn't make it to end of day without cleaning out his office. The board had made it clear, resign or be fired. He chose the paper-thin dignity of resignation, but no one was fooled. His face had gone gray, the lines of worry cutting deep like gouges in old wood. He didn't look at anyone as he packed up his desk, shoving awards and framed photos into a cardboard box like they meant nothing, because they didn't anymore. The emails went out. Effective immediately, Chuck Rollins has chosen to pursue other opportunities. A lie everyone recognized. Brenton Miles went next. He put up more of a fight. Months after that devastating meeting, after the chaos and resignations and market collapse that rocked the entire industry, the world seemed to move on, but the people who had sat at that table never really did. The building that had once housed Callister Equity Group's flagship division was sold off floor by floor, its shining glass walls no longer a monument to success, but a stark reminder of how quickly fortunes fell when hubris went unchecked. Investors scurried to pick over the carcass of the company's operations, laying off staff who had done nothing wrong except work under the wrong leaders. The industry used it as a warning. Analysts wrote dry reports on governance failures and cultural misalignment, but for the people involved, the lessons weren't academic. They were personal. Chuck Rollins disappeared from the public eye first. The former CFO, who once boasted of being a financial wizard, quietly moved out of state. Rumor had it he worked as a contractor for a third-tier accounting firm, reviewing audits with none of the staff or perks he used to demand. He was seen occasionally at local diners with stacks of paper on the table, tie loosened, hair going white at the temples, eyes hollow. He didn't talk about the past if he could avoid it. People said he drank too much. No one called him for his opinion on strategy anymore. He didn't give speeches at conferences. He'd been a star once, but now he wasn't even a cautionary tale. He was just gone. Brenton Miles, on the other hand, tried to fight the hardest against his downfall. He sent out hundreds of resumes and got nothing but polite rejections or silence. When the trade publications exposed how he had humiliated a black executive who turned out to be the company's owner in effect, no one wanted the PR nightmare. He burned bridges so thoroughly that even firms with terrible reputations wouldn't touch him. At first, he blamed everyone but himself. He raged online in forums, posting angry, thinly veiled rants about political correctness and reverse racism. But it didn't help. No one took him seriously. His professional network evaporated. The calls stopped coming. He sold his car, downgraded to a cramped apartment in a cheaper part of town. At rock bottom, something finally broke open in him. He ended up volunteering at a local youth center because there was literally nowhere else to go. They needed tutors. He was good at numbers, at budgets, even if no one wanted to hire him to do it. So he sat with kids in the afternoons, explaining how to read bank statements, how to budget for groceries, how interest worked on loans they'd be forced to take. And slowly, painfully, he started talking about his own story. Not the sanitized version, the real one. How he had sat in a boardroom and laughed at a man's clothes. How he had mocked him for trying to help. How he'd made jokes about his race, made him feel small, powerless. How he thought it was harmless until the entire company burned. The kids listened in wide-eyed silence. Some of them had seen the same things already, even at their age. And Brenton, for the first time in his adult life, didn't have a punchline. He just had the truth. "I ruined my career because I thought I was better than him," he told them one rainy afternoon. "Because I thought I deserved everything and he deserved nothing. Don't be like me." It didn't erase what he'd done, but it was something. He kept coming back. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't expect it. He just tried to help. Darla Quinn had her own fall from grace. She was the last to admit it was real, the last to let go of the power she had clung to like a lifeline. At first, she tried to spin the story, blamed Arlo for destroying the company for personal revenge, told anyone who would listen that she'd been blindsided. But no one bought it. The board's statement was public. The emails had leaked. The recording of her voice calling him their diversity experiment circulated on social media for a week before the company's lawyers got it scrubbed. But by then the damage was done. The calls from recruiters stopped. The headhunters she'd worked with ghosted her. She lost friends who couldn't be seen defending her. She spent months sitting in her expensive condo, surrounded by her old awards and certificates that didn't mean anything anymore, nursing bitterness like a drink that never went empty. But she was too smart not to see the pattern, too self-aware, ultimately, to lie to herself forever. She had to take the settlement the company offered to avoid a lawsuit, which was smaller than she wanted, but enough to buy time. She didn't have to work, but she couldn't just sit there. She started going to local business meetups, at first pretending nothing had happened. But eventually people recognized her. Someone asked bluntly if she was the diversity experiment lady. She went home and drank too much that night. Then she woke up and realized she couldn't outrun it. So she went back. The next time she spoke at an event, she introduced herself and told them the truth. "My name is Darla Quinn," she said, voice cracking but steady enough. "I ran a department that lost $6 billion in funding because of how we treated one man. Because we refused to see him as an equal. Because I refused to. Because I encouraged it. And it cost us everything." She didn't get applause. She didn't get forgiveness. But she got silence. People listened. And she kept doing it. She ended up running a small job training nonprofit, one that specialized in teaching corporate dropouts, underemployed people, and people of color who had been shut out how to interview, how to negotiate, how to navigate workplaces designed to keep them out. She used her own story as the first lesson in every class. "Don't become me," she would say. "Don't become the obstacle that ruins someone's future. Don't think you can't lose everything, because you can." She was harder on herself than anyone else ever was. She called Brenton once, just once, to apologize. He didn't forgive her, but he listened. Arlo Jennings heard about both of them in passing, in updates from old colleagues and news snippets. He didn't gloat. He didn't chase them down to rub salt in the wound. He was busy. The board asked him to stay on as a permanent advisor, but he turned it down after a year, not wanting to become what he had fought. Instead, he took the money they'd given him and invested in small businesses led by people who reminded him of who he'd been that day in the wrinkled shirt and scuffed shoes, terrified, but determined to prove themselves. He sat with them at beat-up Formica tables in tiny offices and listened to their plans. He gave advice when asked. Mostly, he wrote checks and walked away, letting them do it on their own. He didn't forget. He kept the crumpled note that had been slid under the conference room door. Try cleaning the toilets instead, in the drawer of his desk. He unfolded it sometimes and read it, not to hurt himself, but to remember exactly what hate looked like when it thought it was safe. And he never let himself become that. The end. If you enjoyed this story and its message about justice, humility, and real change, I'd love for you to show your support by giving it a like and subscribing, so you don't miss future stories that dive deep into human character and consequence. I also want to hear from you. What did you think about this plot and the way it unfolded? Which part hit you the hardest? Do you think people like Brenton and Darla deserved a chance to change, or was it too little too late? And tell me, where are you reading or watching from today? Drop a comment with your thoughts. Let's talk about it. Your insights make these stories richer and help keep these conversations going.